In this video, we will be discussing basic SQL select statements. SQL stands for Structured Query Language. It is a declarative language, which means that instead of telling it exactly how to do what we want, we just tell it what information we want back, and SQL Server already knows how to figure that out. SQL is used to do many things in our database. You can use it to create or modify tables, add and edit data in tables, and retrieve data from our tables. Select statements are used to retrieve the data from the tables in the database. It is important to note that the data in the database is not changed when we use a select statement. We can do a number of things to change the output that we get back with our select statement, but the data that resides in the database does not get changed when we use a select statement. So here is the syntax of our SQL select statement. We have a number of clauses. Right now we are going to talk about the select and from clauses, and we will get to the order by clause later on. In a select statement, we really only need to have a select and a from clause. All of the other clauses are optional. So I'm going to go and switch over to SQL Server, and we are going to do a little bit of demo with this. So I'm going to get connected to SQL Server here. When you're getting connected, you want to make sure that you pick SQL Server Authentication, and you want to use your username and password that was assigned to you in class. You can check the Remember Password box, so the next time you come in here, you shouldn't have to enter your password again. So we're going to go to our Databases tab, and we are going to find our Northwind Traders database that we created in class. And we're going to come up here and hit New Query. If you get a Properties window, you can close it. We don't need that, and it just takes up some screen space. So I'm going to close that. We can open our database and take a look at our tables, and this will show exactly what is in our database. So to retrieve some data from our database, we need to do our select statement. We start with select, and then we have to list our columns. So if we want to get at our columns, let's say we want to look at something from the customers table, we can open up the table and we can look at the columns. Let's say I want to see the company name from customers. So the from clause tells SQL Server what table we want to get our information from, and the select clause tells it what columns or calculated columns or what things we want to see from this table. So this is a very simple SQL select statement. I'm going to run this, so you can either hit the execute button or you can hit F5. Don't hit debug. This doesn't really work in SQL Server and you're going to get errors. So I can run that, and we can see from our results we have all of the company names in this table. We have 92 records down here. This is our record count. If we scroll all the way down, we could see 92 as well. Well, that's great, but what if we want to see more than one column? This is a list, a select list. So in a list, we put commas between the items. Same thing in our select list. So I want to see, say, company name and the customer ID. I can put a comma and put customer ID. And now when I execute this, I get company name and customer ID. I could do as many columns as I want here. It's important to note, though, that the last column listed does not get a comma after it. So commas between the columns, but not at the end. If I try to run this with a comma at the end, you're going to notice a couple things. One, I'm going to get some red squiggles under my from, which says incorrect syntax here. means something before that is wrong, which is my comma here. And if I try to run it, I will get the exact same error. So, commas between, but not at the end. Okay, so what if I want to rename my columns? Again, this is just in our output. It's not going to rename the database column. I can use an alias for my column. I can say company name as, let's say I want it to say customer name instead. If I don't have any spaces or special characters, I can just type the new column heading that I want. And when I execute, you'll notice that it changes. Now, if I wanted this to have a space in it, if I just put that space there, you're going to notice we get red squiggles again. This is angry. This is not correct syntax. So if I want a space, I have to do something special with my alias. So I can put single quotes around it, and that will work. I could put double quotes around it, and that will work. And I can also put square brackets around it. And that will still give me the customer name as the heading. Now this as keyword is optional, so you do not need it. I can remove that and execute this, and it will still give me that same column heading. Let's say I also want to make this have an alias. I want to change what it says. I don't want it to say customer ID. I want it to say customer ID with the space again. So I can mix and match with these. I don't have to use the same format all the way through. It's generally recommended to be consistent, but you don't have to do that. Also, I want to note with our keywords here, our select and from keywords, they are not case sensitive in SQL Server, so you can put them in all caps if you want. It doesn't impact anything. You can put them all lowercase. In Management Studio here, this will change our keywords to blue, so you know they're keywords. On occasion, it will change other words into a blue color, and it doesn't really mean anything. So just because something turns blue doesn't mean it's a reserved word, like select or from. Okay, so now what if instead of customer name, or customer name without a space, I want this to say customer's name. I don't have a space, so we might think that we could do this without any special characters surrounding our alias. But when I put that apostrophe in, you can see that something changed. This doesn't look right anymore. And I could try to put this in single quotes, like we did before, but that still doesn't look right. When we have an apostrophe in something, we can escape that apostrophe by adding another apostrophe. So it looks a little goofy here. I have two apostrophes to create one, but when I run this, it will put just that single apostrophe in there. I could also add a space in there if I want. If this is confusing and you don't like it, we can use one of our other options here. So I could put double quotes around it. And now I no longer have to escape that apostrophe. Okay, so again, these are our column aliases. So I can have as here. I don't have to have it, it's optional. So if it makes more sense to you to have an as in between, so you know that it's an alias, by all means go ahead and do that. One thing I do want to talk about though, so if I get rid of these aliases, I go back to my original column names. If I forget this comma here, so if I forget to put my comma between my two columns and I run this, I don't end up with two columns. I end up with my company name column. This is the company name data still, but it's called customer ID. So this can be a little misleading. So if you suddenly end up with less columns than you anticipated, check to make sure you have all of your commas in there. Okay. So that is our column aliases. I'll go ahead and put some back in just so we have it as reference. Now let's call this the customer's name again. Customer name, customer ID from customers. We can also create table aliases. So I like to use descriptive aliases for my tables. Table aliases are shortcuts for us. So we can say from customers as C. C represents customers. And if I run this, nothing changes in my results. But this gives us an ability to have some shortcuts. So rather than always having to know what my column names are, I can come up here and go C dots, and the IntelliSense will limit this to the columns in that table. So I could just say C dot contact title. So this is, or contact, let's do contact name instead. So this is the customer's contact, that if we need to get a hold of somebody at that customer, this is who we call. Again, as with our column aliases, we don't need this keyword has. It still works the same. So that is our table aliases and our column aliases. So what else can we do in our select statement? Well, we can add calculated columns. So let's go look at a different table now. Let's go to our products table. And I can open this up and look at my fields again. So I'm going to do a select from products, and I'm going to call products P. So I can come up here and go P dot, and it should, apparently it's going to make a liar out of me. There we go. Okay, so P dot let's grab the product name, P dot unit price, P dot wholesale price. So this will give me every product in the table, its unit price, and its wholesale price. Businesses often tend to like to know how much money they are making on a product. So how much money they make per unit is the difference between what they sell it at and what they buy it at. So in this database, the unit price represents what this company is selling their products for. So P dot unit price. And what they bought it from their suppliers for is the wholesale price. So we can subtract the wholesale price. And once you start using your alias, it's a good idea to keep going. So we can subtract these two. And I'm going to highlight and run this so that I will just run one of these commands. So you'll notice down here when I run this, I get no column name. That's because when we do a calculation, we have to provide an alias for it, or SQL Server doesn't know what it is. This calculation represents the profit. So I can put profit here. Now that looks a little weird, and I know some people get bothered by this, so we could do as profit, or we could also put this calculation in parentheses. It makes no difference. It's going to work exactly the same either way. So that's an example of a calculation we can include here. We can also include literal values. So if I want the same value to show up for every record, I'm going to put it in single quotes. So in SQL Server, our literal values go in single quotes, not double quotes like they do in most programming languages. So I am just going to type the word product, and when I run this, again, no column name because I didn't give it an alias, but the word product shows up for every record. So when we have a literal value, it appears the same for every row. All right. So we can do some math. We can do literal values. That's pretty much the gist of what we can do with our select statement. Now let's talk about sorting our data. Let's take a look at a different table now. If we go to our employees table, let's get a list of people who work for Northwind Traders. So you may have seen me do this quickly in the previous example. If we want to see all columns from a table, we can use the star. So select star from employees. I'm going to call this one E. Star is the asterisk, but in SQL Server, well, in SQL in general, we call it star. So if I run that, I get all columns returned from my table. So if I just want a list of employees, I might want to include my employee ID. So e.employee ID, e.last name, e.first name. Let's also include their hire date. So when I run this, you'll notice that it comes back, the results come back in order by the ID. And that's generally going to be the default in how your data is returned. But when we have people in particular, that's not an easy way to find them in a list. A better way to sort people is by last name and then first name. So if we want to sort our data, we're going to include an order by clause. So order by, I'm going to say e.last name. So I'm going to start there. Sort these results by last name. So now we can see our employees are sorted by last name. But if we look through our data, we get down here to rows 9 and 10, and I have Suzanne and John Jones. Now, last names are sorted correctly, but we're not sorted in the correct alphabetical order on the first names. Same thing if we go down to the Suarez, the two Suarezes, Luis and Juan. By default, when we sort, things are going to be returned alphabetically, just as a side note. So if we also want to sort by the last name, so that we make sure that in the cases of the Joneses and the Suarezes, that they are alphabetical by last name and then first name, we need to specify that. So again, we put commas between the items in our order by list. So ordered by e.first name. So this is the primary sort. This is the secondary sort. So if I run this again, I'll now see that for the Joneses, John is listed first and then Suzanne. So first sort everybody by last name. Then, if we happen to have the same values in last name, sort them by first name. One other thing I want to mention here is that our SQL does not care about white space. So I could put each of these columns on a separate row, and then when I execute this, it doesn't change anything. I could put lots of spaces in here. Not that this is easy to read or anything, but I can do this, and it doesn't matter. So white space is really irrelevant to our select statements. Yes, we need to have spaces between our words, our table and our aliases need to have spaces between them. I would not have to have spaces between the commas and the columns. It doesn't make it easy to read if I don't, but it works. Okay, so by default, we're sorting alphabetical. If I want to sort things reverse alphabetical, then I have to specify that. And I can specify that by saying descending. So DESC is for descending. I run this, I get all of my employees in reverse alphabetical order. So let's go look at our Joneses and our Suarezes. When we look at them, we see that the first names are still in alphabetical order though. That's because this descending only applies to the column I specified it for. So descending only applies to last name. If I also want first name to sort reverse alphabetical, I have to specify that. So now they're reverse alphabetical both in the first name and the last name. One other thing to note is that when we sort, we don't have to sort by something that we see. We don't have to sort by something in our select clause. So I could sort by the city that the person lives in. That doesn't really give me any context to my data. I have no reason to know what sorting is occurring, but I can do this. There are certain cases you might want to do this, but it generally doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Undo that and go back to what we had. Alright, I'm going to flip back to our PowerPoint. Just make sure I did not miss anything. Talked about aliases. When we do math in SQL, it's the same as our order of operations from our math class. So we execute left to right. Multiplication and division are done first. Addition and subtraction are done last. Then we override anything with parentheses. So if we don't like the default order, we use parentheses as well. Okay. We talked about our order by clause. So ascending order is alphabetical, A to Z, 0 through 9. Descending is reverse alphabetical, Z to A, 9 to 0. If you don't remember that the ascending order is the default, you can specify it with the ASC keyword. And this will give me the same as not having these here. Alphabetical order. Alright, so just a little bit about the sorting again. In ascending order, we get null values first. So let's include some of those. Let's look at our termination date. When we have no data, we get null values. So we've got a few people in here that have termination dates. That means that they don't work for this company anymore. As a side note, it doesn't mean they were fired necessarily. It just means that they no longer work for the company. And then we have a bunch of people who have a null value in here, which means that they were not terminated or they are currently active and working for the company. So if I sort this by the termination date, I get all the people with a null termination date first, and then the people with termination dates get sorted from oldest date to newest date in ascending order. If I put it in descending order, I get all of my dates first from most recent to the oldest, and then all of the null values last. Okay. And that is that. I will post some example scripts for this demo. I will use some from another class because I want you to have some really good examples for this, and they'll be spelled out. That is the end of our lecture on select, from, and order by clauses. So we will discuss this a little bit more in class if you guys have any questions, and we will work on practice problems. We'll see you in class next week.